All right, welcome, folks. Good to be back after a month break here because of last month's all stakeholder meeting, but now we'll be set to resume our monthlies again until December. So, Jeff, could I ask you to read the antitrust statement quick?
Okay. Antitrust commitment. The Advanced Water Heating Initiative is a member-supported collaborative of professionals from across the U.S. This diverse membership includes numerous competitors, and care must be taken to scrupulously abide by federal and state antitrust laws. Members should always remember that antitrust compliance is important at all times. At this and any other AWHI meeting, participants should not discuss competitive pricing, profitability, allocating markets or customers, or promotion of particular products, and or what's going on with weather.
Awesome. Thanks. Done, Jeff. Sweet. So, real quick here, just have our intros and talk about some AWHI news, and then we'll have Peter discuss some price responsive load shifting research, which he's been doing over the last year, and as well as some takeaways from that. And then we'll have a Q&A and open floor. And again, if anyone has any recent research they'd like to present on this call related to load shifting, even if it's for another technology besides water heating or any thermal storage research they're doing, please feel free to shoot me an email at noah@newbuildings.org and we can get you scheduled in. And if anyone has not been on this call before, I invite you to quickly come on camera and just introduce yourself and where you work. I feel like I'm seeing some new names here.
Hi.
Hi, I can.
Okay. I'm Ari Katz, senior engineer at GTI Energy. So new to the group, introduced through Eric Olson and contact at GTI, Jason LaFour.
Awesome. Good to have you, Ari.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lily Smith. I am from the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. Maggie Kelly Riggins was previously on some of these groups, and so I'm taking her place, and we're studying a lot of heat pump penetration in the Southeast. So glad to be here.
Great. Thanks, Lily.
And I am Christy Green. I'm a researcher at UC Davis Western Cooling Efficiency Center, and we're doing a good bit of load flex research.
You should probably, this is what our
Oh, I think you.
this is what our
Thanks, Christy. Sorry, I couldn't tell if someone else was talking or if that was background noise, but awesome.
Hey, my name is Vishwanath Arda. I'm working for Media Corp as a principal engineer. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you. Great. So one big event that is upcoming during the week of same week as Heat Pump Water Heater Day in late October is a heat pump water heater installer training event. It's going to be an all-day event in San Jose. So for those of you who are Bay Area local or just want to come in and learn a lot about heat pump water heaters and some other cool tech, then you're definitely welcome to join. It'll be a free event. And I am kind of co-leading organization of this with Jeff, who's doing most of the work. So I'll let Jeff say a few more words about this upcoming training.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Noah. And actually, we've got to correct the address at some point, Noah. It's I believe 780 Commercial, but we can get
Understood. Okay, I will
Yeah.
make sure to correct that in the slides.
So what you have there is the Union Local Hall at 393, but this will be at the training center, and they train both, for pipe fitters, steam fitters, HVAC, and other plumbing related trades. So this training is going to be brought to you mostly funded by PG&E and the Union Training Center, but all the manufacturers working in this space, not all, but some key cornerstone funders are going to be providing equipment that's going to be physically installed and running at the Union Training Center. And the local apprentices and journeymen getting recertified are going to be doing the install work. So there'll be 4 heat pump water heaters, 2 or 3 recirculation systems in place, as well as a drain water heat recovery, a combi system, so both space and water heating, and then a large commercial on a skid product. So it'd be 5 different stations. We'll work everybody through. So we're going to break the group up into 5 different groups, and you'll go from one station to the next. There'll be a bit of a kickoff in the morning, and then it should all wrap up by 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Jeff. Yeah, and we hope to see folks there. And Jeff, would you actually mind popping the corrected address in the chat here?
Yep, I was going to do that. I just was hard to talk and do that. So
No problem. No, of course. Well, thanks again. And next thing here is that we're continuing to collect heat pump water heater photos for a repository, both for single-family homes and for multifamily homes. And if you have any photos, it'd be great if you could email them to joe@newbuildings.org. Joe leads a bunch of the other working groups for AWHI. And these will be free to use heat pump water heater photos so that other folks in AWHI can also access this as a resource for reports and graphics and whatnot, right? I find that heat pump water heater photos are always hard to come by, especially on any sort of Shutterstock site or something else that's free. They'll often show you gas heaters and other things that are not applicable there. So just a kind of good thing to have for everybody. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Peter and let you all stop sharing here and let you go ahead.
All right, my turn. Okay, just quick confirmation check. Can you see the slides, Noah?
I can indeed. And your
All
audio
right.
sounds great.
All right, thank you for that confirmation. So hello, everybody. I'm Peter Grant from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and at LBNL, I lead a lot of our research focused on what I refer to as residential thermal systems and load shifting controls. So thermal systems in this case mean space heating, space cooling, and water heating, providing those 3 main thermal systems, as well as doing a lot of work developing what we call price responsive controls. So these are controls that can be incorporated directly in devices or perhaps implemented by an aggregator or utility load shifting program that are aware of your electricity prices and how they may vary throughout the day, and then automatically change when they consume electricity so that you pay the lowest possible price given your price curve, while still making sure you get the services you want, right? We're not saying, obviously, the way to minimize the cost of your water heater is to just not give you hot water, and we're absolutely not going that way. So we've done a lot of research over these topics in the last few years, and we're kind of coming to understand both what it takes to do this successfully and what the market needs to look like in order to really capture the potential here. So let's dive into the details. First important point here, the world really has changed since I was in college. I remember people laughing at the concept of impractically expensive renewable power because solar was just obscenely expensive back then. Now here's the cost of electricity from different sources in the United States, according to the Lazard Levelized Cost of Energy Report. And Lazard is not an environmental advocacy group. These are financial managers seeking to help investors make profitable business decisions. If you look at their report, wind is the cheapest, and utility-scale solar is the second cheapest form of electricity. These low prices are driving rapid adoption of renewable energy nationwide. And, the renewable sources do have the challenge that they are intermittent and they're dictated by the weather. But if you add battery storage, wind is still competitive with natural gas, and both wind and solar are commonly cheaper than both coal and nuclear. But as we all know, adoption of renewables can make the grid harder to manage. When utilities can't control demand, which they never have been able to control, and supply is dictated by the sun, you end up with some pretty steep ramps. Here's a visual from the Electric Power Research Institute highlighting that California's duck curve analogy is no longer accurate. Now it's more of a canyon. As we overproduce electricity midday, wholesale electricity prices actually become negative, meaning that producers are paying people to consume their electricity. California's renewable energy and heat pump goals will exacerbate this curve, which creates a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, midday overproduction will make the grid more difficult to manage, which drives up electricity prices. On the other hand, there will likely be an astonishing amount of negatively priced midday electricity that we can potentially get paid to consume. And this creates a great opportunity for us. We can develop controls that shift loads from times of peak grid demand to times of negative electricity prices. Doing so would dramatically reduce the cost of operating the grid and slow the rates of electricity price growth. Noah, you left a comment in the chat that oh, never mind. I don't need to respond to that one right now. Okay. And this isn't just a California thing. Here's data from a state that couldn't be more different from California, Texas. Since renewables are now the lowest cost form of electricity, over the past 4 years, Texas has added about 4 times as much solar power as natural gas and about 2.5 times as much wind power. Now look at the resulting load curves. 2025 load in Texas looks a lot like 2018 in California, and 2030 in Texas looks a lot like 2025 in California. The duck curve is now nationwide, and the abundance of low-cost renewable power will soon be a nationwide opportunity. Berkeley Lab is working to help seize this opportunity. We're leading the California Energy Commission-funded CalFlex-Hub Consortium that's developing, demonstrating, and commercializing price-responsive controls for various devices. We're also leading several projects in the Department of Energy's Store for Build Consortium, which is focused on advancing the state-of-the-art and industry adoption of thermal energy storage. One technology which is common to both consortiums, and which is quite appropriate for this group, is the unitary heat pump water heater. So this group knows about unitary heat pump water heaters. I won't spend much time describing them, but a quick recap to highlight the aspects that are most important to this conversation. They have small heat pumps, large backup resistance elements, and 40 to 80 gallon storage tanks. Our goal is to intelligently adjust the amount of energy that's stored in the tank such that the heat pump runs only when electricity prices are low or negative. The resistance elements only activate in intentional controlled ways, and most importantly, occupants never receive cold water. We do this leveraging the CTA 2045B communication signals, primarily the shed, load up, and advanced load up command. And I've shared LBNL's load shifting approach with this group before, but I'll give a quick reminder. Our goal was to develop a set of cloud-based tools that utility programs can use to shift load and reduce operating expenses given current heat pump water heater capabilities. No new signals, no new sensors. We examine the baseline electricity consumption of a fleet of heat pump water heaters and create groups with similar baselines indicating similar hot water consumption patterns. We then customize CTA 2045B signal schedules for each group of heat pump water heaters and each electricity price schedule. So compared to uniformly applying a single schedule to the entire fleet, regardless of price schedule, this approach significantly reduces the operating cost of the fleet by shifting more load away from the high price period and to the low price period. Our simulations with the displayed price schedule predicted we could shift 90% of the load away from high price times and reduce operating costs by 67%. We've also performed a field study with 10 120 volt heat pump water heaters controlled around 2 CalFlex-Hub price schedules and 3 current utility price schedules. And Noah, thank you for your participation in that project. The field results confirmed that we can successfully shift load and reduce electricity costs, sometimes up to 46% in the field. They also showed dramatically different results depending on the price schedule, indicating that the economic incentive provided to homes by the price schedule strongly impacts the choices made by automated load shifting controls, which probably isn't a surprise, but is valuable confirmation. So we've created an algorithm, we've done a proof of concept, and we've shown benefits in a field study. This is all good, but let's connect it back to the ultimate goal. How much can price responsive controls change loads to help reduce operating costs and support the grid? We can explore that question, we simulated a fleet of 148 heat pump water heaters using different monitored hot water draw profiles. We started with no load shifting, and the water heaters were using standard manufacturer feedback controls to maintain hot water supply. The top plot here shows a typical price of operating California's electricity grid in the summer. Prices are low for most of the day, driven by low demand overnight and high solar production in midday. But as afternoon comes around, solar production decreases and cooling load increases, driving the price as high as 78 cents per kilowatt hour. Without load shifting controls, the heat pump water heaters consume a lot of high-priced electricity, and it costs about $89.58 to run the fleet of heat pump water heaters that day. Now, if we use LBNL's algorithm, we can use the advanced load up signal in the morning, when prices are really cheap, to dramatically increase the energy stored in the tank prior to the high price period. This both provides low-cost electricity to the user and enables using the shed signal during the evening to avoid high-price consumption without risking sending cold water to the occupants. Assuming the exact same occupant behavior and hot water consumption, the result is satisfied hot water customers, avoided peak period electricity consumption for the utility, and a 67% reduction in heat pump water heater fleet electricity costs. So there's clearly great potential, but that's still only one electricity price schedule. How adaptable is this? So we can address that by doing a thought experiment and just changing the price schedule and examining the new outputs. The plot in the center is the exact same plot as on the previous slide. What happens if, to generate different price profiles, we arbitrarily shift the prices by 6 hours? So the plot on the left shows the results with the price shifted 6 hours earlier in the day, and now the price or the peak price occurs at 1 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. The plot on the right shows the results with the price shifted 6 hours later, with the peak at 1 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. And you can see there are 3 very different resulting load curves. In all 3 cases, the maximum electricity consumption occurs when prices are lowest, and the heat pump water heaters rely on their storage, not heat pump operation, to coast through the high price period. The curves do end up looking very different, driven by occupant behavior and the fact that these products are responsible for providing hot water to the occupants. But the 3 examples do highlight that the same control approach, with the same fleet of heat pump water heaters and the same occupant behavior, will yield very different load curves when exposed to different prices. But this is just a thought experiment. This is fairly arbitrary pricing. To make this more concrete, let's look at what happens with real wholesale electricity prices throughout the country. These plots show what happens with Californian locational marginal prices on 2 different days. One is a late winter, early spring day. The second is a late summer day. And for those who don't live in coastal California, this is when we get our heat waves. The top subplot shows the locational marginal price for each day, with red indicating positive prices and green indicating negative prices. These are events of oversupply, presenting an opportunity for people to get paid to consume electricity. The February plot had low prices most of the day and negative prices during the solar peak. Since prices were so low, when using wholesale prices, the fleet would cost a mere 7 cents to operate without price-responsive controls. With price-responsive controls, you can shift the load to the negative prices and actually get paid $15.20 to run the fleet that day. Now, the heat wave case showed low prices most of the day, but ramped up to almost $2 per kilowatt hour during the evening peak. The non-responsive fleet, which includes significant peak period consumption, would cost $213 to operate. With price-responsive controls and exposure to these prices, there's a strong economic incentive to eliminate the evening consumption and shift it to lower price times of day. Doing so reduced the cost to $63.63, a savings of 70%. Here are 2 examples that show the potential in Texas. Now, they don't have significant negative prices yet, but as they add more renewables, that's likely coming. The November plot shows low prices all day, with negative prices from 7 to 8 p.m. The price-responsive controls activated the heat pumps in that window. This reduced the daily operating cost from about $4.58 to getting paid 24 cents. The summer case is an example of the grid struggling during an extreme heat wave. The evening price approached $6 per kilowatt hour for a few hours, indicating a grid that's really stretched to the limit and providing a real economic opportunity. Automated controls shifting evening load to lower prices earlier in the day reduced the operating cost from $381 to $95, a 75% savings, and a reason for ERCOT to send out a thank you card. So here are some examples from Minnesota. Nobles County in Minnesota is home to one of the largest wind farms in the country, and it's located in a rural part of the state. Their prices vary significantly depending on local wind speeds. In 2024, Nobles County experienced their lowest price on December 11th and their highest price on December 12th, a mere 14 hours later. Price-responsive controls have the potential to automatically solve both problems. Increasing load during negative prices in the evening on December 11th can not only reduce the operating costs on December 11th, but also increase stored energy to prepare for December 12th. Now, one thing that's unique about December 12th in Minnesota is that the peak price occurs in the morning. This is a cold climate where people are consuming electricity for space heating, stretching the grid on cold winter mornings. It's also when heat pump water heaters usually run the heat pumps to recover after morning showers. The increased energy stored from using advanced load up overnight when prices were a bit cheaper enabled coasting through the high price period with significantly reduced electricity consumption and without people consuming cold showers. Here are a couple examples in Maine. January 17th in Maine showed an interesting case of intermittent negative prices. The price responsive controls activated the heat pumps during both negative price periods to reduce the electricity cost as much as possible. And they did reduce the operating cost by 58%. But would running the heat pump in 1 hour increments like this reduce the lifetime of the equipment? We don't want to do that, so we need to be careful, and we need to talk to the manufacturers to make sure we know whether or not that's a big concern, whether or not that's decreasing the performance for their customers. And if it's a problem, make sure we avoid it. January 13th in Maine showed an example of extended high prices running from about 5 a.m. to 4 p.m. The water heaters had enough energy storage that, with the advanced load-up signal increasing the set temperature, they were able to supercharge the tank during the low evening prices and coast through to the next afternoon when prices dropped again. This reduced the operating costs by 51%. So the potential for price-responsive controls to help stabilize the grid and reduce operating costs is huge and is nationwide, but it's not really viable in the current market structure with current available technology, current commercially available technology. We need to take a few steps to get there. And right now we have a bit of a chicken and the egg problem. Most consumers don't pay time-varying prices, so they don't demand devices with price-responsive controls. Because there's no demand for the devices, manufacturers don't have a reason to make them. But releasing highly dynamic prices without responsive technology would pressure people to schedule their lives around electricity prices. And I don't think that would go over very well in the United States. So we need to resolve both problems in parallel. We need to develop and release the devices while working for electricity price reform. This, of course, raises the question of what the prices should be. Highly dynamic prices showing the true cost of operating the grid would get the most economically efficient result. I don't think there's any question about that. But it would be far less predictable than consumers like, and there may be some, political challenges around that. Perhaps a seasonal time of use rate, which emulates the typical price curve that season, would be adequate? I don't know. That's a research question. Simultaneously, we need to develop and deploy control algorithms that respond to prices by minimizing people's operating costs. This could include supporting utility programs, sending CTA 2045 signals to fleets of products, as we're doing with Southern California Edison and with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. It could also be manufacturers incorporating price-responsive controls directly into their products. Some heat pump water heaters on the market now do have native price-responsive controls, and we're talking to 2 manufacturers about commercializing our Easy Shift control algorithm, so there's potential for growth on that front. It could also be trusted third-party aggregator companies shifting loads in response to prices as a service, similar to the investor-owned utility programs. Now, we focused on heat pump water heaters today because this is the Advanced Water Heating Initiative after all, but this can really be applied to many different technologies. We at LBNL have a number of different products and technologies, either directly in-house or in our network of supported organizations, helping to make this a reality. For unitary heat pump water heaters, we've developed an algorithm, evaluated likely performance via simulation, performed field testing, and are helping utilities adopt the techniques. A few months ago, many of you saw my colleague Brian present on field results using our Easy Shift algorithm to control multifamily central heat pump water heaters. We're now working to create a supportive simulation tool chain and writing proposals with one manufacturer to help them integrate EasyShift directly into their product. We're also writing proposals with a manufacturer of thermal energy storage for rooftop units, intending to integrate EasyShift into their products for cooling commercial buildings. We've performed simulations for residential pool pumps, showing the potential for about 80% cost savings. But the pumps shut down when we attempted to perform field testing, and we've paused tech transfer efforts until we can get that resolved. We've also simulated performance of EasyShift in residential HVAC systems, and are working with consultant colleagues who are performing field testing with residential space heating systems in Maine. Others at LBNL have worked on similar projects for commercial buildings. So we're making a lot of progress on developing and commercializing the needed control algorithms for a broad array of different products and building services. Now, this industry can create a price-responsive reality of easier grid operation and reduced electricity costs, but it's going to take a lot of work. We at LBNL are excited to collaborate with all of you to make it happen. This could include working with manufacturers to develop load-shifting algorithms while making sure consumers have positive experiences. It could include transferring this technology to the utility ecosystem, advising load-shifting programs, or helping design rate structures that yield the needed results. It could include working with governments to define requirements for load shifting control or the relevant building codes. And it could include lab testing to demonstrate performance of these technologies or evaluate the performance of load shifting programs. Whatever it is, don't hesitate to reach out if you see an opportunity for us to help. So thank you, and I'll open it up for comments or questions. I see several of which in the chat.
Peter, excellent job. That was great. There are a couple of questions coming in already. Would you talk more? I think Brian started answering this, but would you talk more about the CalFlex Hub prices and then also the marginal prices and how you're even finding that information for other states?
Yeah, a couple good questions there. So the CalFlex Hub is a research project that we at LBNL are leading, which is focused on, like as mentioned, developing, demonstrating, and commercializing price-responsive controls for different devices. And it's building on a lot of prior research LBNL has done, which looked at just analyzing the true cost of operating California's electricity grid every day in the year for several years, and consulting with the Public Utilities Commission, to really understand that. So we used that prior research to identify 4 typical price curves for different seasons that represent, common costs of operating California's grid in the winter, spring, summer, and fall, and created what we refer to as the CalFlex Hub price schedules. And I see Noah mentioned CalFlex Hub highly dynamic prices. Brian mentioned that these are hypothetical prices from CalFlex Hub indeed. So, I will mention they are hypothetical. They're meant to be typical prices that represent what California's grid probably costs to operate. And these are available. We have what we call the CalFlex Hub Affiliates Program. And if you join the program, essentially, we will give you information on how to access the prices so you can use them in your projects. And in exchange, we ask that you let us know what you're doing with them so we can tell the California Energy Commission about the good work that you're doing. How we got access to the wholesale electricity prices, you may have noticed some text on the bottom of that slide, those slides that said something along the lines of price information provided by GridWorks Consulting. So GridWorks Consulting is a small consultancy based out of New England. They're the people I mentioned that are doing price-responsive control for space heating systems in Maine. I don't know how to get the prices other than talk to GridWorks, who gave me the prices.
Understood, because it's hard information to find.
It is, yeah. And if somebody is interested, don't hesitate to let me know. I can talk to GridWorks. They'd probably be happy to share their data with you. And they might have some tips on, just telling you how they found them so that you can find them on your own.
Amazing. Okay, great. Stephanie had a couple questions too. Stephanie, would you mind just coming off mute and maybe discussing some of your great points there?
Yeah. First, Peter, these results are wonderful. I'm so glad to see that there's so much shift available. It's really positive. The problem I see with these is I look at this and I'm like totally frustrated by current rate making policy. I don't know if you've seen the most recent proposal for PG&E. I know some folks at LBNL certainly have because they've been in some of the working groups. But you know, PG&E put a subscription on there ostensibly for rate pay, you know, for high and low bill protection, but actually what it ends up doing is massively flattens out the amount of load shift you can do. Just because you they basically assign you a load shape, and your divergence from the load shape is then the what you get, what you pay on. And so, you know, have you done any look at like using those PG&E with subscription and stuff like that, and show what the difference is between, you know, like I don't know whether the CalFlex Hub prices have T&D in them. T&D is the majority of the energy cost in California, and you pay it no matter what, unfortunately. Even if the solar is like next door and it's only going 30 feet, you pay for the whole T&D system as though it was going through the whole system. But those T&D costs are really high, plus the subscriptions. What happens when you look at either existing rail rates, or especially these rate proposals from places like PG&E to these numbers? Because I think they go down to almost nothing. But I would love to know.
Well, that's simultaneously a fascinating and disappointing question. I don't like hearing they go down to almost nothing. So I've been vaguely aware of the subscription model that PG&E is using. I was not involved in those conversations. I'm much more on the, you know, water heater, HVAC, and algorithm side, and less on the advising around price development side. As you mentioned, some other people at LBNL are aware of it and have been talking about it. So trying to remember the several different comments and questions you brought up. So we have not done research looking into how the subscription impacts the load shifting performance and cost savings that people would receive. That strikes me as a really good suggestion, and I think we probably are going to do it now that you've brought it up. We just haven't done so yet. I would say that the prior work we've done advising CPUC on the cost of operating California's grid did take into account transmission and distribution. And so when we develop highly dynamic prices, including the CalFlex Hub prices, that does include not only the wholesale cost of electricity, but also the transmission and distribution. And I would make the argument, I think many at LBNL would as well, that highly dynamic prices should include transmission and distribution costs, and those should be time varying because, you know, it's very easy to distribute electricity at midday when the grid's not under stress and there's plenty of excess capacity available. And it's much harder during a heat wave in the evening peak when the distribution grid is stretched to its limit. Those are the events that might cause us to build new distribution lines. And if we can avoid that, we save a ton of money. So, you know, people should get rewarded financially for helping avoid that problem. I recall you had 3 things I wanted to respond to, and I only responded to 2, and I don't remember what the third one was. So if you feel like I missed something, please remind me now.
I don't know what the other one was either. Sorry.
Well, if you're satisfied, I'm satisfied. Good enough.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Bruce. I could chime in with a few things. In other parts of the world, the distribution, the lease, and probably the transmission costs are time varying. So that's just a choice. There's nothing about those costs which says they have to be fixed. And I think the CalFlex prices were taken from the wholesale prices, and then with the vertical scale expanded to get more dynamic range. They explicitly include distribution, but it really doesn't matter what the prices are, because the prices 2 years from now will be different from the prices today. The important thing is to show that with a lot of dynamic range, you can get a lot of load shifting, you can get a lot of value delivered to the owner of the water heater. And the subscriptions actually don't reduce the incentive to shift load. What they do is they dramatically reduce the value that goes to the customer that did the shifting, so they really eviscerate the value for people wanting to do it at all, because they just can't get much value over the course of several years.
Bruce, would they not be incentivized to shift to make sure, or I guess shift out of their subscription curve, right? Because wouldn't they be penalized if they're using energy outside of their allotted time zone, basically?
So it's worth noting it depends, right? So if your subscription is a pretty average shape, that's reflective of sort of the average user on the grid rather than you yourself, then it makes sense, right? Because you get paid for shifting away from that average, which is generally what we want to see. Not always, but generally. However, if you have a if the site that you're at has a particular load shape, like so think about this. If you get a subscription based on your historical load shape, and then you buy a water heater that can shift and you start to shift load, and that load shift tends to happen at a particular time of day, say 4 to 9 p.m. And then after a few months, PG&E notices that and they say, oh, we're going to update your subscription. And so they take into account the fact that you've been shifting from 4 to 9 p.m., take your subscription way down at that point. And at that point, you can't you can't shift more, right? So you're always at risk of if you consistently shift from day to day, and your load shape like sort of permanently changes, they will take that back from you, so that in the future you'd have to shift at a different time, which maybe has less value. So there's this risk when you buy a flexible device. There's always a risk, right? Because prices can change. If everybody buys a flexible device, those peak prices aren't going to be as high. But with subscription, there's a risk directly about your load. If they're using your load to do the subscription, they can, and you shift consistently, you can lose that benefit over time as they change your subscription.
Understood. Okay, I didn't know the curve evolved. From what you said at first, I kind of thought it was more locked in, right? But that's very helpful. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, this is Bruce again. My connection dropped a moment ago. Ultimately, we shouldn't get too distracted by subscriptions. They're a terrible idea. People don't do that elsewhere. It's incredibly complicated both for the grid and for the customer. And if the PUC continues with it, then the whole thing will fail. I can guarantee that. So anyways, it's a huge problem in California, but we should plan for a future which doesn't have, because that's the only way this will work.
Understood. Good points, Bruce. Does anyone else have questions for Peter or comments about rate issues? Looks like we got one in the chat.
Yeah, so Ari, we are currently in the process of creating publications that talk about Easy Shift. We do also have some slides that talk about it. Brian presented on it here at the Advanced Water Heating Initiative a couple of months ago, and we can share that slide deck with you. We'd also be open to just setting up a meeting so that we can discuss it directly with you. So don't hesitate to shoot out an email if you'd be interested in that.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, is there any way I could ask a quick question as well?
Of course. Hi, Addy.
Oh, hi there. Sorry I wasn't able to introduce myself earlier. I'm Adi. I'm an undergrad at UC Santa Cruz. I also worked with Peter on these algorithms. So Peter, I know you mentioned CTA 2045B, and you also mentioned integrating directly with manufacturers. Do you plan on going about doing that with a physical controller or going directly into their firmware?
Yeah, so when I was talking about integrating directly with manufacturers, I was mostly talking about collaborations between us and the manufacturer, where we have a control algorithm that they are interested in integrating into their product. And so we just have a joint project where we help them do that. It could also be a scenario where we don't currently have an algorithm that's appropriate for their product, but they want one, and so we collaborate to make one. That's entirely an option as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff?
Hey, Peter, thank you for the great presentation. Good to see that this continues to develop. One question I have from in your perspective, your opinion, do you feel that the manufacturers are nimble enough to integrate changes to pricing, change in the landscape, how utilities operate, how PUCs operate, how the technology evolves? Or do you think that should be based more in a universal communication module, or the ability to update through packet and over-the-air updates? Just, I'd love your opinion.
That's a very interesting question. So I'll do my best to respond to that one without mentioning specific names. We've definitely been seeing so far that startups are perhaps, well, I guess it's probably cliche at this point, but startups are the most nimble, and they are expressing that they're very interested in adopting these sorts of techniques. They view it as a sort of advantage, right? That it's a selling point they could use to sell their products, establish services they're providing to customers, and help grow into a stable business. So the startups are the organizations that are really interested in adopting our algorithms. Beyond that, it really seems to me like it varies a lot from manufacturer to manufacturer. We do know of one major manufacturing company that has a heat pump water heater who, without even consulting us, created their own price responsive control algorithm, and it's now available in their products. Anybody can purchase it. Others seem less interested, and I do think, there's probably a pathway where maybe some publicly developed control algorithm is hosted on a UCM or is implemented by a utility load shifting program or an aggregator, just because, simply because a product doesn't have the capabilities directly installed from the manufacturer doesn't mean an occupant shouldn't be able to shift load and get electricity price savings. So we need to make sure there are other options in case some manufacturers are less nimble or less interested.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons I bring this up is, if Peter, and I'm sure you've been to water heater manufacturing and engineering groups, this is old steel companies. These are big Herculean devices, and change is tough. And so I think as this technology evolves, we need to keep that in mind and make sure it's accessible to everybody, and we don't leave anybody behind, or we don't have behemoths who become laggards that create a drag on the system and reduce the amount of adoption. So thanks for taking my question.
Certainly. And thanks for sharing your perspective as well. Ah, yes, Bruce Helft. So Bruce asked in the chat, is LBNL developing load shifting algorithms for other appliances, say thermostats or HVAC equipment, where heat pump winter space heating needs increase nighttime demand? So I will scroll back a couple of slides. So this is showing kind of a matrix of progress we've made on different technologies. So we talked today about unitary heat pump water heaters. Bruce, you're well aware that we're working on central heat pump water heaters. We had a good chat with you about that recently. We also have an algorithm. It's the same easy shift algorithm as central heat pump water heaters, which could be deployed in commercial building rooftop units and phase change material storage designed for those. So we're talking to a manufacturer about integrating into their products. We've also worked with residential pool pumps, and we have some work with residential heating and cooling systems, both in-house at LBNL and in our extended network, including GridWorks Consulting out of New England, whom I've mentioned.
What kind of signals are you able to send for residential heating and cooling? Are you using CTA for that as well?
So some residential products do now use CTA 2045. In other cases, we are working with physical Raspberry Pi controllers installed on site that communicate with the product via Modbus. some of these products are not as grid enabled as
Mm,
unitary heat pump water heaters are at this point. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that front.
a great point.
Has any of that communication been done with OpenADR yet, or only CTA 2045?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, which, I state that because there might be something I'm not aware of, it has not been done with OpenADR. I will point out that Bruce Nordman, who has been chiming in occasionally here, has done a lot of work on developing OpenADR, and OpenADR 3.0a has been revamped and is much easier to use than OpenADR 2 was. So if you haven't looked at it in a while because it was challenging to use, you might want to take another look. And also does include capabilities that are the same as CTA 2045 commands. And so we think there's a lot of reason for people who have not previously adopted OpenADR to do so, and to make it possible to use OpenADR for these sorts of products.
Yeah, and this is actually Bruce here. So the heat pump controller I own from Harvest is currently taking in prices over OpenADR 3, and it was a lot easier to implement than they imagined because OpenADR 3 is so easy to implement. I don't think that they're making that available to other people because of this subscription price problem in California, where it's just not worth it. But they have the technical capability, and they could if we had hourly prices that people could pay that were worthwhile. They're just waiting for the regulators to catch up, but they're ready. They already did the software. And importantly, this was a free software upgrade over the air from the manufacturer. This was not built in when I bought the device. In fact, originally it was done in the cloud to TOU, and then they updated it to do the optimization in the controller locally in my house, but based on hourly prices.
Okay, I have to look into that. I'll send out a contact to talk more. Thanks.
Jeff, go for it.
Peter, it's sort of along the same lines of some inquiry and also your opinion. While some people say CTA 2045 or OpenADR, do you see them as sort of a blurred line and it really doesn't matter and they're basically complementary to each other and they can work in the same ecosystem?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure what I think about that one. I do view them as being rather similar, right? And they're kind of serving the same, very similar roles. I guess the key difference is that OpenADR, it's a little more easier to use OpenADR over, say, Wi-Fi without needing to install a module. So I could see, just thinking off the cuff, right? I could see a situation where CTA 2045 is very valuable for devices that don't currently have Wi-Fi communications. And maybe you need to install a CTA 2045 cellular module because that's the only way to get communications to the device, or Wi-Fi module to connect to the local Wi-Fi network. Whereas if it has Wi-Fi, maybe you could have a software-only version of CTA 2045 that uses Wi-Fi, or OpenADR, and they're probably pretty equivalent in that scenario.
I think some of it, at least some of the work that we've done, and with the work we did with BPA and others across the country, the Wi-Fi connection was always the weakest link. And so, and for both residential and on the commercial side, because most IT people will never let a device talk through their firewall inside their building. So that's why the additional leap is there. Having said that, OpenADR through a CTA cellular link is a great solution. It's not an or, it's an and.
Okay, great. Thanks for those thoughts.
That opinion, but that's why I was asking you. It's like, Peter, does that make sense to you, or is it one of those things like no, they're very vastly different?
I would say that makes sense to me. I would also say I'm perhaps not the best person to ask that question.
Yeah.
And I would also mention that PG&E's Water Saver program has been echoing similar concerns to what you just said. They use some CTA modules that communicate via Wi-Fi and some that communicate via cellular. and they much prefer cellular because the Wi-Fi ones lose connection, potentially because Wi-Fi is just inherently less stable than cellular, but also very frequently because people change their Wi-Fi passwords and they forget that they have to update their communication with their water heater to have the new password, and it just loses connection.
Yeah, that was our experience a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Jeff, would you expand on that kind of OpenADR plus CTA combined use case? Because I've seen some literature about it, but it can feel a bit unclear sometimes why you'd be using both together.
Well, so it's much like, and I'm going to date myself here. We used to have an internet protocol communication that was just Apple based and one that was DOS based or Windows based. And now when you get into these not internet connection, but network connections, and you used to have Novell and Microsoft Exchange and those kind of things, they didn't communicate very well. They didn't play together. But the reality is, once you started saying, we're kind of going after the same thing, let's all agree on some protocols that do mesh together, and there's a link between the two languages and two approaches. And in my opinion, I see that CTA may provide a great linkage into a device without having to go through a router or go through your Wi-Fi connection, and you can just pump OpenADR signals through there, which, as Peter has pointed out, have a lot more flexibility and maybe more diversity, and as Bruce will tell you at length. And so it's not an or, it's an and many of the standards have been written as or, and it's gotten people to say, well, OpenADR is a little easier. As long as I become OpenADR certified, then I can check that box. But the reality is they don't get much adoption.
Understood. Great explanation. Thank you.
Go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation, Peter. I'd love to connect with you after and send you an email indicating as such. So look forward to doing that. But I just wanted to kind of reinforce what Jeff was just mentioning there. And so, sorry, let me back up. I'm with the Consortium for Energy Efficiency. And so kind of speaking on behalf of a lot of the IOUs across the country, and I lead the Dynamic Energy Management work area, where we're trying to identify what the best connection standards and/or communication protocols are for, in particular, water heating and HVAC. And I like this discussion around kind of using both OpenADR and CTA 2045 in concert with one another. One of the things that I think we're really focusing on, and I'd love to hear you speak to kind of the proprietary or non-proprietary nature of some of the connections and how OpenADR and/or CTA 2045 might alleviate some of the concerns around proprietary connections.
When you talk about proprietary, well, could you elaborate on what you mean by proprietary connections?
Yeah, one where you have basically an encrypted connection that you have to have a subscription model for. You have to pay to get access to the data. For example, a particular manufacturer may not allow for utility signals to get to the devices unless somebody's paying a subscription fee to make that device available.
Okay, so is that mostly in terms of an API? Like I know one manufacturer that hasn't, okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of a shame. I think having to pay in order to access the API or having to pay in order to send signals, which are two business models I've heard of manufacturers using for their APIs, will limit the impacts that these load shifting programs can have and limit the value of the APIs. I know one utility has asked me to look into these sorts of algorithms and not only identify the technical potential and the cost savings that their customers could achieve, but also identify the cost effectiveness of each different signal so they can minimize the number of signals that are sent because they have to pay, X dollars per signal. So I, for one, would really very much prefer to not see subscriptions or prices for using the API. And I do think that is an argument in favor of something like CTA 2045, where, to my knowledge, and again, maybe there's something I'm not aware of, but to my knowledge, nobody has to pay anything to send CTA 2045 signals. Once the module's installed, it's good to go. And that could be very impactful.
Thank you. Yeah. Another aspect on this is thinking maybe a bit longer term about whether a company is, going to stay in business or even retain those services in that space, for example. And so that's the thing that utilities are particularly concerned about. Just thinking about kind of the motivation for the actors that are involved and wanting to make sure that if a device is being leveraged for capacity constrained area, grid flexibility services, that it's going to be there in 10 years. And it may not just disappear if a company goes out of business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there's also the risk that a manufacturer could just decide their API wasn't profitable and shut down the API. And I think that's another big reason to lean more towards something like CTA 2045 or OpenADR via Wi-Fi, not going through the manufacturer's cloud, but communicating directly with the water heater. Less risk of the manufacturer deciding it's not profitable and taking it away.
Thank you. Look forward to connecting later.
Yeah, looking forward to the chat. Should be a good one.
Any final questions, folks? We have only a couple more minutes here.
Is it okay if I ask one more?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so two things. First was, were these results all based on actual, water heaters running, or were some of them simulation?
Yeah, so these were theoretical simulations. We have a simulation model which closely matches the performance of one manufacturer's product, and we were using real monitored hot water consumption data from 148 different homes to represent the fleet. So it's simulation. It's not going to be 100% perfect, representation of what happens in the field, but based on that, those different connections to reality, we think it's probably quite close.
Awesome. And is that simulation software available to people outside of LBNL?
We can make it available. It's not currently the most user-friendly thing in the world, so if you access it, be ready to ask a number of questions, which we'll be able to answer.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Alrighty, folks. Well, we're at about time here, but thanks for all the really engaging questions and participating in the chat. Love having love having all the working group members participating and engaged. So this was really great, and thanks, Peter, for inspiring so much engagement too. Awesome presentation again, and I will stop the recording now, but this will be viewable on YouTube, and we'll also send the PDF of the slides out.
Sounds good, yeah. And I'm always happy to help drive stimulating conversations and help us all figure out how to make the world a better place.